you for joining us for the second of our 3 series community awareness events for the 2019-2020 school year. My name is Abby Edgecombe. For those of you that don't know, I'm the SCIP coordinator for Lincoln-Lancaster County. And tonight we're going to be talking about gaming, specifically youth gaming. This is something that I am sure all of you who have a touch with youth is something that you've experienced or that you see, whether or not it's a problem or not. That's sometimes hard for us to know. When does something become fun versus when does something become something that's problematic and interfering in other parts of our lives? So that's what we hope to gain tonight is some knowledge and education around what does a gaming disorder look like? How can we support kids? How can we help them to develop healthy balances with their online use? And then hopefully have some strategies and some ideas to engage kids in other activities outside of gaming and their online world. So with that, I'm going to introduce Jeremy Eberly, and you threw me off because she's teasing me about her last name, and Janet Johnson, who are both therapists in our community. And I'll let them share a little bit more about their roles and the work that they do with youth, and specifically with gambling and gaming use disorder. So with that, we'll let them get started. I will say, while I have a mic up here, their mic is for our audio and for our visual over there, and so we're going to try to go without a mic for them. If that does not work, they have this available to use. All right, thank you.
Can I go first?
Well, like Abby said, my name is Janet Johnson. I work at Choices Treatment Center, and I'm a licensed independent mental health practitioner. I'm a licensed substance abuse counselor, and I'm a disordered gambling counselor as well. Started, working in the field of mental health about 15 years ago. And
I don't have to use this,
oh gosh, I was trying so hard. And so yeah, we've been with Choices for the last 15 years and started seeing an increase in young people coming in, and mostly with anxiety and depression. And then after we start kind of peeling that onion back, a lot of it is with some gaming. And then as they get a little older, more into their later teen years, that gambling piece starts taking off. So that's how I came to be.
All right, my name's Jeremy Eberly. I work at my agency, Eberly Therapy Services. Started in mental health 10 years ago, 12 years ago, which is where I met Janet. I was working at Choices Treatment Center. I'm a licensed independent mental health practitioner, a certified disordered gambling counselor, and a licensed alcohol and drug counselor. And I echo what Janet said. When I came into the field, a lot of the client age I was seeing was 35, 45. Now it's 22, 23, coming in with some pretty big problems. So we'll go ahead and get started from there. I'm gonna stand next to you.
Yeah.
Yep.
We pass off a lot, so we'll just kind of hang out together here. So that's us. Go ahead.
All right, so in 2007, there was a study done by Stanford University that showed that 8% of youth could probably meet the criteria for gaming disorder. By 2018, that number had risen to 16%, so it had doubled in a 10-year time frame. In 2017, $36 billion was spent on gaming. By 2018, that had gone up $99 billion. Anybody know what game came out between 2017 and 2018?
Fortnite.
There it is. Look at the, so educated. I love it. Yes, that's 100% real. The majority of this money was spent on gaming content, such as upgrades or downloadable content, and microtransactions is another big one. We'll talk a little bit more about what those are as we go through.
So one of the things that is very real about the gaming industry is that it is updating all the time. So I just got this from the New York Times magazine, and it says that globally more than 2 billion people play video games, including 150 million Americans. This is 60% more, or 60% of whom game daily. So out of the 2 billion people, 60% game daily. Game Informer is the 5th highest circulation of any American magazine. This surpasses AARP magazines, Costco, Connection and Better Homes and Gardens. When Grand Theft Auto came out, it was released in 2013. It generated $1 billion of revenue within 3 days. And video games are now one of the most lucrative sectors of the entertainment industry, having overtaken film, television, music, and books. Games are also the most popular and profitable type of mobile app, accounting for about 1/3 of all downloads and 75% of Apple App Store revenue. So this stuff is moving fast.
Out of curiosity, what do we have for audience? Are we mostly educators, parents, all of the above?
A little of everything.
Little of everything. Okay, wonderful. Because one of the things that we really want to stress is this is not a gaming is bad conversation. Okay? This is a how to spot it if it's a problem. Because for about 95% of the people that play games, it's not going to be a problem. There's 5% that we're looking at that the most recent studies say have a problem with this. So of all the people that play games, you're going to have about 5% of those that pop up as having an issue. And so what we want to do is just educate what it looks like if somebody has a problem. Okay, signs and symptoms. So what you're looking at is preoccupation. They think about the game even when they're not playing it. Withdrawal, this is the number one thing I see with parents is they're like, when I take the game away, they become angry. And that's the scary part. And so when they're not allowed to play, they'll become irritable, they'll become frustrated. You may see some physical symptoms such as sweating, and that's because their brain is not getting the dopamine release that it was used to. Tolerance, they need to spend more time and money on the game. Now, like when you contrast this with substance use, we understand tolerance as I need to take more of the substance to get drunk or high. But with gaming, as is similar to gambling disorder, I need to spend more time on it or more money on it in order to get the same effect that I was getting. They lose interest in other hobbies or people as the game begins to take over more and more of their focus. The number one thing that I usually start to get, the first thing that lands somebody in my office is continued use despite negative consequences. This can be parents have set a rule that we can't follow anymore, or grades are starting to slip, or things along those lines. But that's usually where I'll start to see somebody, is when the negative consequences are happening and they're still continuing to game. They begin to become deceptive about the amount of time or money that they spend on gaming.
And one of the things about that is that it's not a moral lie, okay? And so I was reading again in this this New York Times magazine, and it talks about how a week of play equals 17 minutes in a game. And so, like if you're doing your gaming, your game will feel like it's a week's time, and it's 17 minutes of playing time. Okay, so this is where the hours go away very quickly. And so your child or your young adult is not trying to give you a moral lie about spending the amount of time or the amount of money, because money loses value. And so we're not thinking about how much that is. We're just hitting the button that says upgrade our lives. And, but also they're not really looking at the clock. And so how many of you guys can get absorbed in an activity? Reading a book. What else? What else do you guys get absorbed into? Where time just sort of gets suspended. Netflix. Very good. Netflix is a great example. So yes, and we just found out that Netflix has a new game.
This is fantastic. So I found this out today. Netflix has a game on it where you can basically track your achievements by like how many shows have I watched, how many episodes have I watched together, and so there's now a leaderboard based on that. So before any of you get any ideas, I'm gonna win, so just shut that down. Don't get cocky. But no, they're creating a game even within what we would normally view as TV watching, and so that's interesting. We now have gaming to escape negative moods or distressing situations. And so if if I've had a bad day, I just want to get back to the game, because the game provides me some sense of safety, because I get back control of my life when I'm in the game. Jeopardizing school, work, or home relationships. This is where parents are getting frustrated. I've had some young adults in college years, girlfriends are leaving, things such as that, because it's just the game is taking over. So you need 5 or more of the criteria in order to be considered to have the disorder. We're going to talk a little bit about the different types of gamers that we see. We're going to break them up into 2 groups. There's action gamers and there are escape gamers. And the reason that they break them up a little bit is that there's different motivations involved in what I'm going about trying to achieve. So we'll talk a little bit about our action gamers first. These are our arcade kings, machine beaters, or action seekers. Arcade kings, they're typically male, late teens or early 20s. The interesting thing about them is they're not likely to chase losses. So if they lose a lot in the game, they'll just play a different game. Because they want to be the best at the game, but we're not going to chase it. If I'm not good at this game, I'll play a different game. In order to win, though, they will likely spend large amounts of money. And so they want the best of everything that the game can offer. So these are people that do a lot of loot crates, a lot of upgrades in their game very, very quickly, so they can go through a lot of money really, really fast, because they're trying to find a way to become the best at the game. They're often undemonstrative in play, what we refer to this as the poker face. I had one guy describe it to me pretty well. He's like, actually I think he was describing it to you, that he was like, I don't know, 19 or 20, and he was playing against 8-year-olds, and they were saying how great he was. And he's like, I didn't show him anything. I didn't show any emotion. And like that was the rush for him, was this is how good I am, then I don't have, this is just another day for me. And so they want to portray emotional stability even when they're winning or losing, doesn't matter. Their motivation is based on status. They want to be seen as cool. And so going back to that example I gave, it's like, it doesn't matter if I win or lose, I'm always a cool guy. And so that's a little bit more what they're after, is the status of being seen as such.
That gentleman, by the way, was 19, and so he's playing against a bunch of 8-year-olds. And again, he was just very, he was smiling as he was talking about how he was playing against these 8-year-olds and how he's just schooling them. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, that's how engrossed you can become in this. But yeah, that poker face, and his whole goal was not to say a word the entire time. And the responses were, dude, you must be really good at this. Oh my gosh, how did you do that? And he's eating it up, because again, it is all about winning.
Continuing with these guys, they believe in skill. They like to memorize patterns of games. They like to, they become very, very good at, this happened on this part of the game before, I'm going back to that. They have a very, very good memory for things like that. They'll play individually, but if they're going to play as a part of a team, they're usually, and I say this usually, they're usually going to be on the best team. If they're not on the best team, they're going to play individually, because that's, again, there's too many factors that they can't control if they're on a team. And so they want to focus on being more of a team in that sense.
Just out of curiosity, how many of you guys played PacMan when it came out? And how many of you guys, there's quite a few, and so how many of you guys can, within about, the first 2 minutes, remember the pattern?
That's how you win that game.
It's so much fun. I watched my husband do it, because he's, we're PacMan eras. And so he's sitting there and he's playing the game, and he's got his eyes closed nearly, because he can just do it. And that's the part of where, we believe we have a skill. But the thing about the Arcade Kings is that, that skill level is like amped. And so.
That's a question.
Yes.
And they don't show like an emotional response. Is there a research or anything like to suggest like a physiological response is occurring?
Oh, yes. The question was, they don't show an emotional response, but is there a physiological change that's occurring? And very much so. Good.
I was just saying, it's more of like a heartbeat. They'll notice increased heartbeat. Sweating is one that they'll talk about afterwards. But what's the word I'm looking for? Physiologically, there is a lot happening within their brain, but they just don't want you to see it. Does that make any sense? Okay.
And they don't always understand it either. And that's the part of where, with this dopamine rush that's occurring, you know, they don't know what's happening, but they just know it feels good. And sometimes as young people, if it feels good, don't tell an adult. And so that's the other part too of why we need to have the poker face, because, you know, adults take things away if it feels good. So there you go.
All right, next we'll talk about machine beaters. Now these are typically men that play alone or young men that play alone. Their potential for addiction is very high because they want to be seen as smarter than the machine. And so it almost becomes linked to their self-esteem in that sense. They don't like being watched because they're often very emotional in their gameplay. And people will see me, if I don't do well at the game, people will see that and they will judge me based on my value within the game. I was working with one the other day and I was talking to him about his gameplay and I was like, does anybody ever watch you? And he says, no. He says, that's in a dark room by myself. Because if I lose, he says, I've broken controllers, I've broken things within my room because, and then he says, then I lose the ability to play. Because then parents start taking away your PlayStation or your Xbox because you're not showing that you can handle it. So they don't want to be seen when they're in that state either. But it's such it almost feels like, the way he described it to me, let me just say it that way, it feels like survival. When I lose, I died. If I died in the game, I died. I have to be able to project that image of
I have the ability to win.
I have the ability to win. I want to be a winner, and this is the way to do so.
They'll start to miss school and work, family events. Again, kind of goes back to what we were saying before, is usually when we start seeing parents, caregivers bringing in their loved ones, is because they're starting to sort of disappear and wanting to play all the time. I have a gentleman who, he's 19 and he has a full-time job. However, he has also, he had some voluntary overtime on a Saturday. And he said, nope, because, was it Speeders? Speed?
I know what you're talking
Speeders
about.
came out, some game came out. It came out Thursday night. Now, he knows enough that he made himself not play it until he had a day off, but they had overtime. And so he made sure that because he checked the word voluntary, so he didn't go in. And so then that way he got to play Friday night, Saturday, Sunday, and then Monday we had that really cold day. And he was like, well, I took off Saturday, I have to work today. So, you know, again, this is somebody who's kind of dabbling in that area of, he knows what a problem looks like, so he's not going to miss work. But he also won't volunteer if he doesn't have to, because he'd rather game. And so that's the part of where, you know, you're going to have some of these individuals who are just right on that edge because they know what's kind of socially acceptable and what's not.
They believe they can memorize and beat the machine, and I mentioned before, their self-worth comes from their ability to do so. They're unable to manage their losses and their emotion. I mentioned that before. They're often remorseful and shameful. I call these guys my shoulda guys because they can tell me what they should be doing with their life. I should be going to college. I should be having a job. I should be doing this. I should be doing that. So they know and they want to sort of get there, but they don't know how to do that. And so it's easier to just go back into the game because that always has a constant sense of, there's constant measurable growth in the game. I'm always getting better at the game, but if I turn in 10 job applications, I don't know which one I'm gonna get or if I'm gonna get any of them. But this will always have a payoff in some way, shape, or form. The way they play requires a great deal of time and money. They may resort to illegal behaviors. I've had some people, I had one guy spend his parents' tax return because they got it on a card, and he is very bright and memorized the numbers on the card. And so
the lacking of patience and self-control. And so we have an older couple. He's 27, she's 25, and he's gaming uncontrollably. So what they decided to do was we were like, okay, so here's the plan. You're just going to, because he needed to sell some things, and in order to pay off the debt. So we were like, okay, so we met him on a Thursday, and this is the plan throughout the weekend. So we'll meet you back on Monday. And all we want you to do is take an inventory of the things that you're going to sell to pay off these debts. Because a lot of times you get some overspending that occurs because you have all these additions, things that you can, once they play the game, the master of the game, they sort of want to get rid of the game. And so those are some extras he's going to get rid of. And the patience level of, by Monday, he had sold everything and, skipped the entire plan and then went into, so now I have money. We're like, okay. So the lack of the patience, the self-control, and that's one of the things that kind of drive them nuts in counseling, is because we slow them down. And if you're used to running at a pretty good pace, having talk therapy, which it's not, we do have activities you have to do, but talk therapy is kind of slow. So.
Let's see, they're more focused and motivated by the machines than by social interaction. The way one guy explained this to me really well, I liked, he said, when I play the game, it's the same every time. The game is the same. Social interaction, I don't know how that's going to go. I can ask you questions today that don't have any relevance tomorrow, and I don't know what to do with that, so this is just easier. And so I'm going to go with the thing I know how to do. And so they will retreat further and further into the game as a result of that. They will deprive themselves of other needs to save money for gaming. I've seen some people had not skip some meals because I need the money for the game.
Let's see. And so this is back on that New York Times magazine. So a typical gamer in the United States spends 12 hours playing each week. 34 million Americans play an average of 22 hours each week. About 60% of gamers have neglected sleep to play. About 40% have missed a meal. 20% have skipped a shower. And in 2018, people around the world spent a collective 9 billion hours watching other people play video games on the streaming service of Twitch. 3 billion more hours than just a year before. And so this is, the interesting part about it is it's not just playing the game themselves. They will watch people play games so that they can increase their skills. And so think about that. Watch somebody else play a game. And, so that's, but 9 billion hours. 9 billion hours a year were spent on that. And so the South Korean government has passed a shutdown law considering this a public safety problem. And so this prevents anyone under the age of 16 to play games between the hours of midnight and 6 a.m. And so that's kind of how pervasive this is.
All right, our action seekers. They're attracted by the rapid cycle of wagering, anticipation, and release. Basically what you're looking for here is now our action seekers want to play the games that have the most action in them, games that you can wager on. As an example, Grand Theft Auto now has a casino in it, which is interesting to me. But also you can bet on this kind of stuff. We'll talk a little bit more about eSports, but you can bet on your ability to beat somebody else in a game. And so we're seeing more and more of that. They like the status of being an adult. They're attracted to games that are more adult-centered, such as Grand Theft Auto or Call of Duty. And they like that excitement of playing. They're looking for that thrill. They're looking for the dopamine rush that comes from that. They are at risk for problem gambling later in life. I don't believe that's necessarily a causal relationship. I believe more what you're focusing on there is they're comfortable with that level of risk. that comes from either gambling or from gaming.
So is it saying that
So the question,
Yeah, go for it.
Okay.
You repeat the question.
So the question was, is it true, or are you, isn't it the same? Okay, yes. Is it the same thing to watch people play a game as to get better at the game as it would be to watch somebody play football to get better at the game of football? And yes, that's...
You bring up a great point, and I don't disagree with it at all. The problem with it is the pervasiveness of it. Mm-hmm. It's not a matter, it's what's the word I'm looking for? So I'm a Minnesota Vikings fan. So I will watch I know it's sad every time. You didn't need to reinforce how sad it is. But I will watch them play every Sunday, and then that's pretty much the only game I'll watch, okay, is outside of that. But I'm not up at 3 a.m. watching Vikings highlights unless like we do something really cool. So that's happened once. Like I'm not up at 3 a.m. watching that in order to get better at that. I watch it one time when the game is on. So you're right in the fact that that is what we do. We do that as Americans. We watch that. I mean, HGTV has buying and selling TVs or how to decorate your home better, okay? So that's not bad. It's are you doing it to the detriment of work, school, relationships, things like that. Does that make sense? Okay.
So, and it also brings up a good point too, because again, why is gaming now a problem? You know, I bring up the PacMan that I grew up on, and oh gosh, Tetris.
Super Mario was
and okay, you're a little younger, so you had Super Mario. Mm-hmm. I was babysitting children with Super Marios, yeah. And so you know they were playing these games, and the question was, well, why now? And you know, so I was talking to some different and reading some different articles, and it's kind of the pixels of it, and so it's more lifelike, and also you are a character in it. Super Mario's, you see Mario going, but in Call of Duty, you're it. And so there's a difference there, and that's how it kind of changes. And so, you know, it's not the same game we used to play. It's very person-centered as opposed to action-centered, action-figured-centered.
Well, and especially when you get into online gaming, because that will be even different. If I'm playing against other people in the game, it's not going to be the same map every time, or I'm not playing against the same people with the same level of skill. Mario, I can guarantee you run 10 steps, and then you hit the mushroom that's not there, but you know it's there because you've played this game before. You pick it, and then you get to be bigger, and then you get to dominate the whole game. But we'll talk about my skills later. Like, it's the same every time. Whereas when you're playing online, it can be different in that sense. Question?
I thought the question was more like an athlete in college trying to get better playing football, watching film to prepare for the game that weekend is what I thought he was asking. So comparing that type of preparation like they do with gaming.
And I guess I would say your question is it the same as watching film to prepare for a football game coming that weekend? And I would say yes, to some degree. But are you up at 3 a.m. doing it at such a time that it's disrupting classes, disrupting relationships, things like that? And some athletes are. Some highly motivated athletes are. Michael Jordan is a great example. If it wasn't basketball, he wasn't doing it. He later had a gambling problem, but outside of that, like that, there are people that are going to be that hyper focused on the games that they're playing, whether that be athletics or video games.
Does that affect the brain the same way though as the gaming does?
Yes, it does, because it's about competition. Okay, and so. It comes down to, I believe that there are going to be people that are just not going to be at the skill level of a Michael Jordan. They may put in the same amount of hours that Michael Jordan did, and they may have, but they will not always match that level of skill. And so when they don't, then there's a huge fall in self-worth.
Which,
go ahead.
And so, yeah, the question was then, does it affect the brain the same way? And the answer is yes, but also, again, remember, you have to have 5 or more of these markers before we have a concern. And so, by what Jeremy was saying as far as what other areas is it affecting. And so.
All right, game action addicts are drawn to, so we'll have Player Unknown Battleground, or PUBG as it's called, League of Legends, Fortnite, Call of Duty, and Apex Legends are usually the ones that we've had people with in the last few years. Now, Apex Legends kind of popped up for like 2 months as a problem, but most people went back to Fortnite or other games. But that was one that was popular for a little bit. World of Warcraft. Now, the thing to know about these games is they usually involve some amount of strategy and or competition. And so that's where the draw is for people. I want to be better at a game that there is an objective that I can attain, so that there's a skill set in there. Escape artists are the next one. So we're going to talk a little bit more. We're moving out of the action and into the escape gamers. Go ahead.
Is there any statistics or correlation with violence in a game to a problem with gaming?
Not, let me put it this way. Okay, I'm going to be very honest. Not that I have seen yet. That doesn't mean that it doesn't exist.
Statistical violence correlation.
Yeah. God, I'm sorry. I keep forgetting to repeat the question back. So if you ask me a question and I don't repeat it, remind me to repeat it. Not that I have seen yet. That doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It just means we don't know yet. Escape artists are typically they can be either male or female. This is where we'll get more of our ladies involved. They typically experience a depression or social anxiety. They may be socially isolated. It provides a sense of isolation from human interaction and allows them to escape from problems. I mentioned before, one of the things that's similar to them, as similar to machine beaters, is that they get their feeling control back by going back to the game. Okay? The machine becomes the friend. The machine becomes a way to communicate with other people. And so it's always reliable. It's always there. I can turn on at 3 a.m. and there's still somebody playing the game. They're at high risk for problem gambling as well. They would be our escape gamblers. And I believe that's because it's sort of a coping skill that we adapt and identify. That there is a way for me to feel better, and that is to go towards something that is machine-based. But their gaming is secondary to their anxiety and or depression. So if you can resolve that, a lot of times the gaming will come back into balance. So that's where you want to work with them. They're drawn to less strategy games. They don't really care if they win or lose. It's not about competition. And that's where they're separate from the machine beaters. They just want to play because it allows them to feel connected to something. Does that make sense?
These are kind of individuals who are playing until they get a certain feeling. And so, and we talked about, how many people can get kind of lost in a book, or maybe get lost in, here's the next slide as far as the different types of escape games: Candy Crush, Toon Blast, puzzle games, Fruit Ninja, Angry Birds, and so how long do you play those? Do you play until your 5 lives are up? Do you play until, I'm getting a head nod, and, or until I get tired of the puzzle game and I can't solve it? And so I'm playing for a certain feeling. And, people talk about how they get feelings in other ways. So people have talked about runner's high. Never experienced it, but I've heard it happens. And, and so then we have, other people who, like for me, it's standing in the shower. And so after a long day, I stand in the shower and I just kind of wait. And I'm like, okay, finally, yep, now I can actually start showering. Because there's that certain feeling that I have to get to before, because if I get in the shower and just start showering, it's the worst shower ever. And, but it's like the one spot where nobody bugs me. And so that's the part of where, again, they play these games differently. And so further on we'll talk about how some games can be played action-based or escape-based, and Keno is kind of one of those games. And so Keno, am I trying to beat the board? Or Keno, I play all these numbers and just kind of wait until I get the feeling. And so that's kind of the difference between the two.
Okay, incentives to play. So we're going to talk a little bit more about those microtransactions and loot crates. This allows video gamer users to purchase goods or upgrades for a small fee. It's designed to keep them playing. So as Janet mentioned, when the 5 lives are out, you know, it says, do you want to keep playing for 99 cents? It'll give you 5 more lives. And so that's an example of a microtransaction. It shortens the length of time it takes to get an upgrade. You can buy better weapons or camos. The thing that's interesting about loot crates and loot boxes is people that use those are more likely to engage in gambling behavior later in life. I don't believe that's causal. I just believe they're more comfortable with risk. They're more comfortable with that because you don't know what you're going to get every time you buy it. I may buy it this time and it gives me a huge upgrade on my weapons, or it may be garbage, but I know I still have to spend 20 bucks to get it. And so of the loot box purchasers, the top 5% of those, 45% of those individuals later had problems with gambling. The interesting thing about loot crates is that it uses the principle of random reinforcement, which I kind of talked about. You don't know what you're going to get when you're buying it. You just know you're buying something, and hopefully it's really cool, but it may not be. But anytime you buy one and it is really cool, it reinforces that I need to keep doing this.
You know, again, we go back to this. We're not trying to damn gaming at any point of it. And so, but the idea is that oh gosh, I had a good thought and now it's gone. And so, but it's basically, you know, again, 90% of the population can do this just fine. And so that's the part of where I might look like my friends, but something different is happening on the inside than, you know, what my friends may be having. And so, you know, we were talking earlier before we got here, and we kind of talk about how, you know, cigarettes were the gateway drug, or, you know, alcohol is the gateway drug. And so we do all these campaigns on don't drink, don't smoke. And the part about it is that those individuals who are more likely to turn into a gambling problem is because they're already at high risk. They're risk takers. And so, you know, we kind of sort of now understand that, you know, cigarettes is probably not a gateway drug, but again, I'm performing high-risk behaviors. And so, you know, being drug and alcohol counselors, we have a gentleman and he was talking about how he kind of got into some pretty heavy drugs. And he was like, you know, marijuana never did it for me. But I knew that if I went with this guy to a dealer's house, they probably have connections to someone else. And so that's the part of where, you know, he left his friends doing, you know, just everyday pot and went on to something a little harder. So it's not that it is a causality, it means that we are taking higher risks. Does that make sense? Okay.
All right, we're just going to expand a little bit on random reinforcers. This is random reinforcement. This is what we refer to as the hook. It's the dopamine rush we get to the brain. A lot of times, in China, they have something that they call the compensatory model of addiction, which means that we are compensating for something within our lives that we feel is missing. And so getting that dopamine rush allows us to feel connected. It allows us to feel good about ourselves. And so we oftentimes are looking for something that the game or some form of random reinforcement will fulfill for us. So the part that's interesting is the games are now designed with random reinforcement involved. And so if I go to certain places, there's a higher concentration of better weapons, things like that, but I don't know which box I open is going to get me that. And so they may be in the same spot, but the prize may vary, or they may be in different spots. But that sort of follows the evolutionary imperative to hunt and gather, if that makes sense, because we got to find it. We got to find the best things.
So take it back to, baseball cards. Take it back to baseball cards, because what did we used to do with baseball cards? I mean, how many cards did you have to purchase in a pack before you got the one you wanted? And so, it's the same idea, concept.
All right, eSports. This is where video games are played competitively. The Luxor Casino in Vegas just put in his 31,000-foot gaming center, square foot gaming center. So that's roughly bigger than like a Best Buy. In the casino is they have a whole floor dedicated to video games where people can bet on them. One of the things that's sort of interesting to me is like some of the people playing the games are too young to be in the casino, but they're being bet on as if they were professional athletes. And so that's just ironic to me. Right now there are 600 colleges that offer scholarships for esports. I believe Doane has one now. Is that right? Okay. And I know Midland has one. I'm just saying, I feel like I got gypped a little bit in college. Could have gone pro.
But now, again, talking to our young people, it's an actual profession. And so, again, my age, you ask young people, what do you want to be when you grow up? And you get fireman or astronaut or a school teacher. Now you ask people what they want to be when they grow up, and they say blogger, YouTuber, or gamer. And so it is an actual profession that they're wanting to strive for. So when they see that they have scholarships for this, it even solidifies that even more. This could happen.
As we mentioned, they're predominantly male, but the ladies are catching up. 38% female, that's up from what it used to be. One of the things I thought that was interesting, in 2015, more people viewed esports on YouTube than movie, news, and education combined. So the winner of the Defense of the Ancients 2 game, that had the third biggest prize pool in sports behind the Super Bowl and the World Series of Poker. One of the things that was funny to me, there was a kiddo that won, well, he was 16, won the Fortnite prize this last year. And I think he won $3 million. Now, when I read some of the articles on him, his mom had thrown out his Xbox a couple weeks before that because she was convinced he had too much of a problem with video games. But she still let him play in the tournament, and then he won $3 million. So now that's a harder road to sell. You can't have an Xbox after that. So it is becoming a viable employment opportunity for a lot of people. YouTube and Twitch are becoming a spot for individuals to gain celebrity and money. I've mentioned before, I've mentioned this before, but one of my nephews had a hero day at school, and he went as, I've brainwashed them into being Vikings fans, and I will make no apologies for it. But he went as Stephon Diggs, so I was very proud. But when he told me, I was like, so who else did people go as for Hero Day? And he's like, there were some ninjas, there were some Dan TDMs, there were all these YouTube streamers and people like that. And it was no longer, when I was growing up, it was Joe Montana, Steve Young, all those guys. Like, that's who we win as Hero Day. And so it's just different. It's not necessarily bad, it's just different. You had a question?
How would you define esports? What does that consist of? Like, what things are involved?
Esports is generally games that can be bet on. So Fortnite is considered an esport when played competitively. So they'll have tournaments for Fortnite, they'll have tournaments for Call of Duty, and they'll stream these so that people can watch and see how the player they're betting on is doing. Does that answer that? Did I repeat the question? Nope, okay. The question was, how do you define esports? Okay, so we're gonna talk a little bit about one of the ones that's more popular, one of the personalities that's more popular. Tyler Blevins is his real name, but he goes by the screen name as Ninja. He makes about $500,000 a month streaming. He gets paid to promote games like Apex Legends or Fortnite. Right now, I'm pretty sure he's back on Fortnite pretty exclusively, but I could be wrong. He advertises on YouTube, which brings in revenue to him. Now, the thing that's interesting about Mr. Blevins is he is not, he would not probably qualify as a gaming addict because he sets a schedule. He has two time periods where he streams every day. I can't remember what they are exactly, but he streams pretty much early in the morning and then later at night. And then in the middle of the day, he takes care of like changing the oil in the car, spending time with his wife, things like that. But he treats it as a career, and that's how he manages it. So in that kind of situation, he's not meeting a lot of the criteria because it's not out of control. It's very controlled in how he does it, and so I find that interesting. Types of gamers. You have social gamers, so this is the majority of the population. This is 90%. Fit in that category. They play. They may play a lot, but it doesn't impact their life in any other way. And so then you're getting into periodic harm. And the way I explain this is this would be similar to like binge drinking. You know, they may go out every few months, but it doesn't become a consistent problem. And so you may, when a game comes out, you may have somebody who plays a lot one weekend, but they don't really get into it every weekend. Serious social, now my life is starting to become more and more focused around the game. It's still not reaching a problem yet, but a lot of my activities involve gaming. And disordered gaming is kind of the people that we're working with. They're the ones that are meeting 5 or more of the criteria we talked about earlier.
The professional gamers, again, you're not going to see them because they're kind of like the Tyler Bevins of the world, is that they have a set schedule, they have boundaries around it. These can be people who are horse bettors. They, you know, as far as like gamblers also kind of fitting that same outline, you know, they have definite criteria on whether or not they're going to bet or play.
Just going back to that professional just real quick, does anybody remember 2004, I believe, but I could be wrong, World Series of Poker started to be televised on ESPN? Does anybody else remember that? Okay. And so then I remember all my buddies like, oh, I'm going to be the next Doyle Brunson, or I'm going to be the next professional poker player. And they would talk about how they were going to go do these things. And the part that they don't show on those tournaments like World Series of Poker is if Doyle's in a better match, Doyle leaves. If he's like, you're just a better player than me, I'm going to leave. Because it's not about competition for me. This is about taking money off of people that aren't as good as me. So they'll just walk away from the table. And I find that interesting that so many of my friends anyway wanted to really get into that, and then they're like, this is harder than I thought. Yeah, no, it is, because it's not about competition. It's about knowing who you can beat. All right.
So getting into kind of some more of the harmful effects of gaming, the increased risk of ADD or ADHD due to, again, you're dealing with the part of the brain of where you are a figure in the video game, and so to move so quickly. And that's the part of where sometimes this can then increase the risk of. There's also been some increased risks for individuals who will develop epilepsy because of the stimulation of the lights that are hitting. And so, you know, it's not, again, it's not, it's just kind of a risk, and you have to kind of watch for it. Lower metabolism, which also increases weight gain. Musculoskeletal disorders of the upper body. This is what tech neck is, and you know, and they're finding that tech neck is something that can be irreversible after a while. And so, just kind of to let you know, if you're going to be doing anything in bed, which is usually where we're doing our stuff, or on the couch, or you know, keep the screen at chin level or higher, so that your head is even with it, because they're seeing that as being a problem. One of the questions you had asked about the aggressive behaviors, and yes, we are seeing that as more of children are sort of acting out some of the gameplay, and so we will see some. But
it's very specific to under 10 years old. Mm-hmm. So if it's over 10, we don't see that same behavior. So that's why I can't say that it is a definite link.
And then again, poor social interaction, because we're starting to reduce our time with people and increase our time with the game. And so anytime that we start doing that, it starts to reduce that face-to-face contact. And so higher unemployment rates amongst males in their 20s. This is also underemployment abilities and cause problems in college or high school, more difficulty with relationships, and gamers tend to have lower sex drive. And so what we're seeing is that we're seeing in these individuals who, again, like the gentleman I talked about, he could have worked on that Saturday. Now, if you're going to go for a promotion, you probably want to show up to work and you probably want to show the boss that you're pretty dedicated and that you have the ability to complete the job. He's not going to do that because he's also seeing it as that's kind of, I'm not going anywhere. So I have time for my game because I'm not really trying to get into the whole corporate ladder of it. What's also interesting, and I don't know if we're going ahead or not, but we're seeing individuals who are staying at home longer as well. Again, this 19-year-old, he's living at home. He thinks paying rent is dumb. I'll just live with dad. So that way he has more money to buy his games. And so that's the other part that we're seeing underemployed. And that's the part that becomes very risky because they're having disposable income. The relationship piece of it, they're not really formulating relationships as much. You kind of talked about transactional relationships.
Yeah, transactional relationships is more to do with what do I get out of this relationship? And so it's harder to, this person is attractive, I want to spend time with them. It's what am I getting out of this relationship is what we're seeing more of. Not that that's always bad, but it's just, again, it's just different because it's less about forming an intimate relationship with someone. It is more about what does this do for me? I had a guy explain it to me one time. He's like, I'd like a girlfriend so I had the status of being a guy who has a girlfriend. But I don't know if I want to be somebody's boyfriend. And I was like, that is really honest. Please don't say that to any girl you're dating. But I appreciated his honesty a lot. I was like, that's awesome that you can say that out loud, but let's not say that out loud. And so,
again, part of this, New York Times magazine, which was really kind of interesting, they talk about how single men are uniquely vulnerable to social isolation with the gaming. Studies suggest that men rely primarily on their partner for emotional intimacy, whereas women are more likely to have additional support from close friends. So men in their 30s lose friends at a faster rate than women. Men are more likely to kill themselves because of prolonged emotional or social detachment. So New York University has observed a striking pattern of behavior among American boys in early adolescence. They're openly affectionate with one another, speaking freely of love and lifelong bonds. By late adolescence, they become cultured to project an image of masculinity. Heterosexually and, I don't know that word. Stoicism, they start to distance themselves from their same-sex friends. And as one 17-year-old said, it might be nice to be a girl because then you wouldn't have to be so emotionless. So yeah, they're just really isolating themselves and they're not forming those relationships. We talked about the lack of motivation at work. So the kind of going into sort of the historical development of stages of young people and why gaming at certain ages are kind of delaying those developmental stages. And so keep in mind here that a lot of your games are now suggesting, or your internet use in general is suggesting not before the age of 13. And so even YouTube is starting to say not before the age of 18, and they're starting to have little stricter guidelines. They're on there for a reason. And so if you think about it, we have the trust versus mistrust phase, and that's the basic, from 0 to a year and a half, which your basic virtue is to describe hope. Is this world safe or is it not? Autonomy versus shame and doubt, where this is where they start to perform their will. So think about this will stage. These are your terrible twos. How many times do you see a parent who is sort of like, okay, be quiet, here, watch this. and they give them their phone. I'm mimicking the car because that's where it happens, is the car. You know, those questions of, you know, whys. Okay, we've got a 20-minute trip here. I don't want the whys today. So, you know, I start kind of allowing that phone to sort of replace. And, you know, so now all of a sudden they're starting to have a distraction. They have initiative versus guilt, and they're starting to form a purpose. This is where they start to understand, I can actually manipulate this and do pretty good at it. Go ahead.
Well, first of all, I haven't been that parent because I'm not a parent, but I've 100% been that uncle. But I think the biggest component of it is the industry versus inferiority. This next section that we're talking about, it's where we gain our sense of self, our self-esteem, our ability to maneuver in the world. And that's the part that, even with, you'll notice those games, I don't know that they're using it on Erickson's strategies, but by the time you're 13, you sort of have a little bit of a sense of who you are and some of the things you like. And so they're sort of cutting off the games before that age for that reason, it's delaying that ability to gain a sense of who you are.
The identity versus role confusion, this is kind of that stage of who am I? And it's, you know, if you look at the ages, it's about 9th to 12th grades of age, and we're really kind of asking ourselves, you know, can we commit to another, even if we don't have, maybe we don't agree on the same things, but can we still be friends? And so we're sort of learning how we can have, you know, our own separate identities. The intimacy versus love, and we begin to narrow down who I want to save or share my time or my life with. And so again, all of this sort of gets delayed because we're seeing that people are marrying later and later, and they're also marrying more for that transactional relationship rather than because they actually want to spend time with someone. And then it goes on to the generativity versus stagnation, and the ego integrity versus despair. And so this is more on the gambling use criteria. And so again, we talk about tolerance, withdrawal, loss of control, preoccupation, and escape. And we sort of explained that already through the gaming, so we don't need to really go back to it unless you guys have questions on any of it. Okay. And chasing one's losses, deception, has jeopardized significant relationship, job, education, and career opportunity because of gambling. You know, again, very similar to your gaming, and relies on other people for a bailout. You have your action gamblers. Again, they're typically male, very similar to your action machine beaters or arcade kings, and they want to present as confident and gregarious. They're drawn to the games that they believe have the competitive edge. You know, motive is not necessarily about winning the money. It's more about the status of it. I had one gentleman who told me he was very upset that he actually won because he was the comeback kid. And he never talked about when he won. He talked about how far down he was and how he worked his way back up. So, games that action gamblers can play: blackjack, sports betting, poker, horse racing, keno. Again, we talked about that system. Escape gamblers, again, typically female, and objective is not to win money, but they're looking for that escape. And so, Jeremy mentioned earlier, what are our young women doing? Because we talked a lot about what our young males are doing, but what are the young women doing? And most of them are on relationship social media sites, such as anything that has, they're on chat rooms and they're building relationships. And so it kind of goes, you talked about that primal instinct, and it kind of goes back to that where girls sort of instinctually know, I need a pack around me. It is not okay for me to be alone. That social isolation piece of it. So they're doing more of those types of social media interactions rather than your males. Males, again, from very early on, are taught that they can kind of pioneer out. As women, we don't learn that. We learn that we need to stick in groups. And so there's where the females lie. Escape games are more your slot machine, bingo, lottery tickets, scratch-offs. So similarities, again, we talked about those.
I want to just take a beat to talk about the things that are different here. Is that with gambling, there are two different criteria, and they are both based on money. I have my theory, again, this is not proven, this is my theory, so let me just state that very clearly, is because we don't know how to track the money that goes into gaming yet. Because we don't, it's all, a lot of times they come from parents' accounts, you know, so it might be dad bought something on the game, kid bought something on the game, mom bought something on the game. And so that criteria is there for gamblers, but it is not there yet for gamers. The part that's important to remember here is that money is the tool. It is not the drug itself. It is the thing that furthers our ability to play the game, not the objective in any game.
So how we treat this behavior, again, it's cognitive behavioral therapy, and the purpose is to retrain the brain to seek out other possibilities so that we can cope with boredom, because a lot of people are just like, I'm bored now. And so it's training them that they can actually do other things. I love that commercial where you have the kids that are all in the dark room and they're playing, and the mom comes in and she opens up the curtains and says, go outside. And, you know, because that's kind of what happens, is that we forget how to play. And as adults, we forget how to play. When was the last time you guys played? Played a game. Like went outside and just sort of walked around for no reason.
Oh, I gotta go outside.
You know, picked up sticks, I don't know. But, you know, we don't do that anymore. We lose that ability to play. Developing a support system, they focus on person-to-person relationships, and that's actually very, very important. And so you have those individuals that sort of fight you on that, and they say, no, I just like to be by myself. I'm not sociable. I don't like to be around other people. It creates anxiety, depression. Well, the reality of it is, without those people around you, you're kind of in the same boat, and you're still at a very high risk to, you know, continue the unhealthy behavior. Spending time outside. So working with your young people, a lot of times what we like to do is we like to take them out of the environment. And so wilderness retreats are great. They can participate in outdoor activities. They are not allowed to take any electronics or technology with them. Again, in this New York Times, the place that the guy went was, and the neat thing about it is that it was like $22,000 to go to this inpatient facility. And the parents said, I don't know if we can afford that. And by the end of it, they said, I don't know if we can afford not to. And so it's called Restart, and it was in Seattle. So there are very few inpatient facilities for gaming. But again, the duration is for a month or a few weeks. The longer the better, and can be highly effective. 75% of teenagers have social media accounts. 51 of these state that they check the sites daily. And so, you know, understand they're checking these sites, and actually the more sites they're on, the higher they're experiencing kind of the anxiety and that depression, because they're checking it all the time. When we go back and we talked about how those individuals who are losing sleep in order to game are also losing sleep in order to check their social media pages. And so predominantly females, again, that connection that they think they have. 20% of users report waking up in the middle of the night. More using more sites are at higher risk. And then certain of the regions of the brain become more activated by the likes that they get. And so,
Has anybody heard of streaks on Snapchat? Okay. There's an interesting TED Talk I saw the other day with a guy talking to a bunch of high school kids, and he's asking them, how many of you have streaks going? And they all raise their hands, and he says, how many of you like streaks? And they all said no. Not a hand went up. He says, but we feel like we have to do it. It feels like a part of the connection that we're going for. And I thought that was really interesting, that all of the people in the room, like he started asking why, and one of the girls said, it's exhausting, because I have to do that with 6 different people every day to make sure I hit all my streaks.
I had a mom, and the daughter was caught vaping on the bus, and so she took away all the electronics, okay, because that's what we do. We usually take away your cell phone first. And then she called me and she said, hey, but what do I do about this? She has streaks. First, I like, what do you mean? And then, so I love my young, I have a 20-year-old and an 18-year-old and a 6-year-old. But I called my 18-year-old and I'm like, what is this? And so she's like, oh my gosh, Mom, this is like real. And I said, Okay, that answered my question. I called the mom back and I said, I don't care. And so that was kind of how I handled that. But that's how much our young people influence us as parents, because we don't want to be that parent that ruined our kids' lives. And so I had a gentleman, he's 20 years old, and he broke up with his girlfriend in April. He called me on a Friday night in August, and he said, I want to kill myself. I said, what's going on? And he said, my ex-girlfriend stopped the streak. So this is how real this is. It is not something of where, again, I asked my daughter when she first got her phone, and of course she did something wrong. We took away the phone, and she says, she holds the phone up, she goes, this will cure cancer, Mom. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So she didn't get the phone back for a long time, and because I'm like, I don't think you understand the use of this phone. And so my 6-year-old asked if he could have a phone for Christmas this year. I said, no, buddy, you're not getting a phone. Well, how old do I have to be? And I said, when you drive, I will get you a phone. And, and it'll probably stay in your glove box because it'll be a jitterbug phone. And so his response was, I'll ask Dad. I was like, okay. Again, we have a lot of sleep deprivation, anxiety, depression. We talked about that. We have different types of play. So you want to sort of start looking at the different types of play that people are having. There's onlooker behavior play, playing passively by watching or conversing with other children. Solitary, independent play, we play by ourselves. Parallel play, so we're using the same materials, but we're not necessarily interacting with one another. We have associative play when children share materials. Sorry, I got the parallel play confused. But we engage, we're engrossed in one's activities. Children play parallel to each other, but they share toys. Cooperative play when children organize themselves into roles with specific goals in mind. And so,
can I steal that back? The part that's significant about that is that we're seeing less and less cooperative play out of this generation, because it's more based around competition, and so that's where it's starting to become more of, we're not seeing that. Like when I was growing up, you'd all play basketball and there'd be 2 teams, and that would be the competition that you played outside, but you would at least be doing it with other people. Now it's usually, I may have a team on a game or something like that, but it's less cooperative than it used to be, if that makes any sense.
taking breaks, also how it's being treated is that we take breaks, indoor breaks. You can do jumping jacks, burpees, high knees, hula hoop, keep it up. That's kind of like with the beach ball. I love that. I don't know where these people work, but periodically, if I have to run an errand over by the mall, there's these group of adult men and they play hacky sack. And it's awesome to just watch them. And that's the best thing ever. I mean, they're getting outside, they're getting some fresh air, they're taking a break from their devices, and because we use it for work just as much, so we need that mental break. Shadow box, march, high step, skip, run around, shoot Nerf baskets, push-ups, bridges, indoor breaks. And so there are so many things that we can do. You're starting to see kind of the idea that gaming doesn't have to be it. What's interesting is I was also reading that games were once developed to help relieve depression and anxiety. And now we're noticing that they actually can cause depression and anxiety. And so there's some things that we can do. Outdoor breaks, we go for walks, we take bike rides, go skating, play catch with your kids, or play it with the dog, teach the dog how to play with your kid if you're busy, shoot baskets, hacky sack, build a snowman, work it. So you can see there's tons of things that we need to do. Getting the family involved is actually pretty huge. Because again, we're seeing a lot of individuals who they just don't want their kid to be different. And and that's the part that's very difficult to sort of understand. We're working with a family right now, and she's got 3 kids, and the rule is that 3 kids can have their gaming or their devices for 1 hour a night. That's great. That's really great. Unfortunately, one of those kids doesn't play by those rules. He's staying up at night. He's, so she parented them all the same. One didn't follow the rules. And so that's the part of where we can't really predict which kid or which person is going to have this. And so you know, it's very difficult because she still wants to parent them the same. And it's hard because at the same time, well, you know, Timmy over here got to play for an hour, why can't I? Because you're going outside. And the idea that, well, this is, you know, they have to be on their devices. Social media, that's how we communicate, so I have to teach them how to be a part of this. And so, you know, I really like how they're coming up with mandations of not under the age of 13. So, and there's a lot of factors that can negatively impact family time. You know, schedules, finances, multiple children, I'm part of it.
Well, Jan and I were just talking about that on our way here, how many times, like, I don't know about anybody else, you just feel exhausted. It's like there's 8 different things we have to go to this week. And I don't know how parents do it. I'm an uncle and I'm usually tired by 8 p.m. But like there's sporting events, there's Christmas programs, there's holiday programs, there's all this stuff we got to go to now. And that's all great, but I think it also gets really exhausting. And so that's where it gets hard to have family time together.
We had a kid who described it as FOMO. That was a new term for me, fear of missing out. And as parents, we have that also. We don't want our kid to miss out. So we're teaching our kids to run just as fast as they are. And so, monitor, use, talk, and listen to the teens about what they're experiencing online. It's kind of a different approach. It's more along the lines of, tell me what you learned about that game, tell me how you feel about that game. And by having that critical conversation with them, it starts to build that up. Well, that was one of the things that they talked about in this magazine article as well, is the mom was very, very scared to say, hey son, do you have a gaming problem? And he said, yes, I think I do. And so, you know, being able to just sort of ask those really scary questions. Set rules and boundaries around your devices. And we talked about the 13 have consequences for when they break the rules, not if they break the rules, because they will. You know, their whole lives are to push boundaries and to make sure that those rules are hard and fast. They're doing their job. Are we doing ours? And so, model appropriate screen time. This is sort of huge. So, again, I've got a 6-year-old. Love him to death. He loves Pokemon. I don't understand this. He speaks in tongues. I don't understand the words he's coming out of his mouth. He gets with his little friends, and I'm like, what are you even saying? I don't get it. And so, you know, for him, that Pokemon detective movie that came out, yeah, I was like, okay, you enjoy that. I'm just going to play this puzzle game. And that I had to kind of like check myself on that because I was missing it with him. And so I don't understand Pokemon, but I'm trying very hard to find out what Mewtwo is and Charizard. Mewtwo, yes. So, and then draft a contract about acceptable technology. Let them know that you will be monitoring their play or their social media accounts, whatever it is.
One of the things, I had a dad that I really liked the way he did it because his kids were big into the headsets and talking to people that they were playing with. And so he would just walk by, give me your headset, and he would just listen in. Because some of the things that can happen there that I think is also relevant is you can be playing and learn inappropriate behaviors from other people you're playing with. And so Dad, he would just randomly walk by, give me your headset, and he would listen into who he's playing with. And he's like, all right, that sounds appropriate. And he says, I can't monitor everything. I don't know who's all on there every time, but if it happens randomly, and he's the one who came, that I knew who drafted a contract, he says, I want them to know I will be watching. I will know what you're watching, I will know your YouTube history, but I will also be randomly checking who you're talking to online. And they have conversations about who they talk to online and what they see online, and so that so you can kind of navigate those conversations together. And I was like, that's a good way to do that. If technology is going to be in your world, you got to figure out how do we talk about it together.
That permanence piece of it with digital etiquette, letting them know that the pictures don't ever go away. This is very huge. I have it down further on the sexting part of it, the cyberbullying, and so and have that conversation. What is sexting? So if I ask you guys, what is sexting? What's your response?
Anything you don't want grandma to see.
Anything you don't want grandma to see.
I love that.
No, we
I
have the
love
grandma
that.
rule all the time, and that is perfect because again. I was talking to some young girls, and they thought that it was very appropriate as long as they had their sports bras or their gym shorts on. That's not sexting. I was like, oh, honey, are you going to walk her in school around like that? Well, you're kind of, sort of, mostly. And, you know, but that's the part of where you're taking pictures of body parts that you wouldn't normally show grandma. And that's the part of where what is sexting? Because oftentimes they have a very skewed idea of what that is. The public embarrassment, the legal consequences. Some safe web browsers that we have looked into. Kittl is Google friendly. You know, there's a 3-tier search result. The first tier has where Google determines are they safe for children, and the next 4 to 7 clicks are results for children who can read but may not be written with a kid in mind, and after 8 they're written by experts and they're mostly informational. And so, but it delays because we're kind of that 3-click rule of where we'll look at something, we'll click it about 3 times and then we get bored, and it's the same thing with kids. PickLuck, it's an internet browser, an email system for kids where parents get to determine if it's safe or not. Can be time consuming though, as parents must approve each website. And so that's the part that makes it kind of difficult. KidSplorer, it's a database of kid-friendly sites. Parents can choose which pages the kids get to visit. Also time management devices, and so that really helps. So there you go. There's their references. We flooded you with a lot of information. Thoughts, ideas, questions? I'll give the back to...
Curious, you mentioned professional gamers have boundaries. At some point along the way, they either learned that or somebody taught them how to do that in that professional realm. Have you guys worked with or the research to kind of talk about like how that transitioned from being a kid gamer to an adult who games professionally?
So the question is, how does a professional gambler or a professional gamer come to be? Did somebody teach them the boundaries, or how did they learn how to set those boundaries and how to play professionally?
That I can't answer with 100% certainty. The way I sort of like it is kind of, I liken it to an alcoholic. You know, in America we don't do a great job of teaching our kids how to drink. We just turn 21 and hope that you'll know how to do it. And so I think there are some people that whatever it is, that sensor is just off, that says, I need to take a break from this. And some people seem to know where that line is for themselves. And so I haven't heard of anybody that knows how to undo that once they cross that line.
The other part was, is kind of progressive. And so that's the part. There was a gentleman who had, the parents took away his Xbox, I think it was, at the age of 7. Mm-hmm. And then on his 11th birthday, they decided to give it back. And he knew, because at the age of 7, he had problems with it. So by the age of 11, he remembered, if I play too long, then they're going to take it away from me. So he just got quieter and better at it. But it was as if it had never stopped. And so, you know, it's kind of the similar with the alcohol, is that alcoholics can stop drinking, but if they decide to go back to alcohol, it's as if they never quit. It's a progressive thing, and we don't understand why. And so we have, there's a lot of debate on, you know, controlled gambling, controlled drinking, and that kind of stuff. And then you get those individuals who, you know, well, I kept it under 3, and they're just not happy with their amount of drink or the amount of gaming that they're using. And so that's, again, once you cross that, it's, I don't think you can come back at it from it, but that's just anecdotal from what I've seen.
So what do you suggest doing in there?
It does. The question,
sleeping in class.
right, the question was, what do you do with the individuals as professionals, either in the nursing professional or the teaching profession, when you have children who you know are gaming throughout the night, or you know, are losing sleep, and it's affecting their schoolwork, or they're starting to fall asleep in class. And that's where, unfortunately, it really does come down to being able to have that conversation with that young person. And is it worth it? And starting having those critical conversations of, how does this make you feel? How does it make you feel during the day? You know, because eventually their grades are going to suffer. And is that something that they care about? So if they're saying that I want to be a professional YouTuber, or I want to be a professional gamer, and I don't need to have my education, then go look up who they're talking about. Because a lot of those professional gamers that they're looking at do have education. They are very smart people. And so research those articles and research who those people are. Thoughts?
No, no, you just stole all the thunder.
Oh, okay.
No.
So yeah, critical conversations are key every time. So, yes.
I think you need to approach kids who think they're going to.
No, I really like that. I guess the comment is having that conversation with them is what does it take to become a professional gamer, you know, looking at like in the similar sense that you would with a professional athlete. And I 100% agree with that because one of the things that I've gotten some mileage with some kiddos that I've worked with is, you know, what did it take for them to get where they are now? You know, and what makes them successful over everybody else. And, you know, one of them was like, well, this guy's really funny, you know, and I was like, okay, so interpersonal skills, how do you develop those and things like that. So I actually got him out of what was previously the thing that was scaring him, was I need to work on being around people and finding something that can be funny or informative for people. And so when he did that, then weirdly the game wasn't such a big draw for him. My understanding is he still wants to be a professional gamer, but he got to broaden his life skills beyond just that little focus.
Does that answer completely? Yeah. It's almost like, okay, like you said, but what happens if? So let's come up with a plan B. So,
All their other relationships really well.
right. So the kind of comment / question was, what about the yabbits? What about the kids or the individuals who actually do make it to go into that professional level? Is this a healthy profession for them to be in? And, you know, again, I think, and Jeremy, you can kind of add to this if you see more, but the part that I see with that is they kind of know that this is a flash in the pan. And so, you know, we talk about stars who say, you know, oh my gosh, this newfound stardom, what are you going to do with it? And they're like, well, I'm going to enjoy my 15 minutes of fame, and I'm also going to invest my money wisely. And so they sort of understand that. In gambling, DraftKings and FanDuel they exploded, and they were unregulated, and they were making so much money. I don't even know how much, you know.
It was billions.
It was billions of dollars. And, you know, and then finally the gaming industry stepped in and said, this is gambling. And, you know, this is not about skill, this is about luck. And so they put regulations on it. But they kind of knew that. They were sort of flying under that radar until they got too big, but they kept a lot of that money. And so, you know, those professionals know this is just for now. It is not forever. And that's why those Tylers, they work on keeping those relationships up, and they keep up having family life, and they still know how to do all the things. They shop for their groceries, they change their oil, and they invest in their kids, their spouses, their families in general.
Yeah, I was, as far as research, anecdotal at best. As far as what their life satisfaction is like. I know ESPN did a huge article on Ninja not that long ago. And based on the article, I think he's living a wonderful life. But that goes back to something we talk about with social media in terms of the highlight reel phenomenon. How many of you looked at somebody on your social media and you're like, how are they going on their 4th vacation this year? And I'm stuck here in Nebraska in the middle of winter. You know, we only get to see that part of their life. We don't know what all is going on behind the scenes in that situation. And so I don't know how to answer what their life satisfaction is like. But I do know that's one of the reasons, like, he talks very openly about, these are the rules I put in place. He won't play, he won't stream with another female gamer because he says, I'm newly married, I don't want that impacting my relationship. And so he says, I don't want people saying, oh, you guys are so cute when you play together, and that being stress in my relationship. So he says, I won't stream with another female gamer because it just leads to too many situations that there could be problems. And I was like, that's Smart for 24. That's smarter than I was at 24. Let's just say it that way. But I don't know what the rest, how those boundaries and rules were arrived at, if that answers your question at all. Basically, I'm saying I have no answer. So that's how I answered your question.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Spend a lot of time on these really big problems with technology.
So the discussion is this even a good thing for kids to be doing? And I think that takes us back to, again, South Korea. The government put a mandated time on when kids can game. And so, you know, individuals under the age of 16 cannot game between midnight and 6 a.m., probably because they were seeing a lot of kids falling asleep in school. And, you know, and again, your YouTube, not before the age of 13, because they're losing those social interactions of face-to-face contact. And so, you know, do we have to wait for research to come out before we help kids? And that's the part of where we want to get in there as fast as we can, because these are too precious of lives to not.
I'm not familiar with the South Korea law. How do they regulate that, or, you know, how do they enforce it?
I don't know. I just wanted the mic for that. I just felt it was important.
Yeah, but you got to say it with a smile. Yeah, we don't know.
Yeah.
And so, but that is, we're seeing that more and more governments step in. And so, you know, my guess is it's the same way they can put over an alert or an Amber Alert. I mean, it's something of where if there's a will, there's a way. But does it have to be the government that regulates us? Can it start in our own home? Thank you guys. Thank you.